I need to tell you about Harlow, Nebraska, because nobody else is going to, and because what I saw there doesn't fit inside the kinds of stories people tell about small towns. It doesn't fit inside the kinds of stories people tell about anything. I've been back in Omaha for 11 months now, and I still drive past the turn-off for Route 91 with my hands locked on the wheel and my eyes fixed forward like a woman who knows exactly what's down that road and has decided, with whatever authority she has left over her own choices, not to look. My name is Dana McGuire. I'm 41. I work as a community health liaison for the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services, which is a title that sounds more important than the work actually is. What I do, in practical terms, is drive to small towns and facilitate public health programming, immunization outreach, maternal wellness checks, opioid response coordination, fluoride Vanish events at elementary schools. I carry boxes of pamphlets in the back of a state-issued Chevy Equinox, and I set up folding tables in community centers and church basements and VFW halls. And I smile at people who often don't want to see me, and I drive home. I've been doing this for 6 years. Before that, I was a visiting nurse in Council Bluffs, and before that, I was married to a man named Rob, who is now married to someone else and living in Fort Collins. I have no children. I have a cat named Biscuit, who is 13 and diabetic. I have a 2-bedroom apartment in Benson, where the upstairs neighbors play Fortnite until 2 in the morning and the parking lot smells like the Long John Silver's next door. This is my life. I'm not unhappy. I'm not happy. I'm solvent, functional, and tired in the way that everyone I know is tired, which is to say constantly and without any single identifiable cause. I'm telling you all of this because I need you to understand that I am not someone who sees things. I am not someone who looks for things. I am a person who drives to places, does a job and drives back. And the only reason I'm sitting here at my kitchen table at 4 in the morning trying to put this into words is that Harlow won't let me not. I first went to Harlow in March of last year. The assignment came through my supervisor, Carolyn, who manages the Western District caseload. She called me on a Tuesday and asked if I could take over a series of wellness visits that had originally been assigned to a colleague named Jim Oster, who had taken unexpected medical leave. She didn't explain why. She gave me Jim's files, his schedule, and a list of 8 communities he'd been rotating through on a quarterly basis. Most of them I already knew. Friend, Elsie, Warnetta, small dots on the map between McCook and the Colorado border. Places with grain elevators and Dollar Generals and populations that had been declining since before I was born. Harlow was the one I hadn't heard of. I looked it up. The census listed it at 402 people as of 2020, down from 523 in 2010. It sat in the southwest corner of the state, about 30 miles south of the Interstate 80 corridor, on a county road that connected to Route 91 and then to nothing much. The satellite view showed a grid of maybe 8 residential streets, a main road with a cluster of commercial buildings, a school, a church, a water tower, farmland on all sides, the Frenchman Creek drainage about a mile east. It looked like every other town I'd ever visited, which is to say, it looked like a place that had once been a place and was now becoming the memory of one. The first visit was scheduled for March 14th. The purpose was a general child wellness screening, height, weight, vision, dental check, developmental questionnaire for children under 5. These visits are standard. I do them constantly. Small towns without pediatric access rely on them. I'd set up in whatever space they gave me. The parents would bring the kids. I'd do the screenings, flag anything concerning, file the paperwork, and move on. I left Omaha at 5 in the morning to make the drive. It's about 5 hours if you push it. The route takes you west on I-80 past Grand Island and Kearney and Lexington, then south through a series of state highways that narrow as you go. The towns getting smaller, the distances between them getting longer, until you're on 2-lane roads with no shoulder, and the only other vehicles are grain trucks and the occasional cattle hauler. I like these drives. I know that sounds strange given everything I'm about to tell you, but there's a kind of peace in western Nebraska that I've never found anywhere else. The sky is so wide it almost hurts. The land is so flat and open that you can see weather coming from 60 miles away. It empties you out in a way that feels almost medicinal. I reached Harlow just after 10. The town resolved out of the landscape gradually. A water tower first, then the silhouette of the grain elevator, then the trees, and then the buildings. I turned off the county road onto what the map said was Main Street. There was a gas station with a hand-lettered sign that said open, a post office, a hardware store that looked closed, a bar called the Goldenrod, a small brick building with a sign that said Harlow Community Center. This was where I'd been told to set up. The community center was unlocked. Inside it smelled like floor wax and old coffee. There was a main room with a linoleum floor and fluorescent lights, a small kitchen in the back, 2 bathrooms, and a closet full of folding chairs. A banner on the wall said Harlow Harvest Festival 2019 in orange and brown letters. The fluorescent tubes buzzed with that particular frequency that I've come to associate with every room I've ever worked in across rural Nebraska, a sound that lives somewhere between a hum and a whine, just below the threshold of conscious attention, but always there, always filling the silence with its thin electric complaint. I set up my folding table, arranged my equipment, taped the sign-up sheet to the door, and waited. The first mother arrived at 11. Her name was Patty Kern. She was in her mid-30s, heavyset, with a direct manner and a 4-year-old daughter named Lily. We did the screening. Lily was healthy, a little underweight, good vision, no dental concerns. Patty was friendly in the way that people in small towns are friendly to state workers. Polite, cooperative, slightly guarded, conscious that you represent something large and distant that has the power to make their lives more complicated. I asked Patty, as I always do, whether there were any community health concerns she wanted to flag: water quality, air quality, environmental exposure, anything. She looked at me for a moment that lasted slightly longer than the question warranted. No, she said, we're doing fine. Over the next 3 hours, 11 more families came through. 22 children total, ranging from 8 months to 12 years old. The screenings were unremarkable. The children were, by every metric I measure, healthy. Some were quiet in the way that rural kids often are around strangers, watchful, serious, more comfortable with silence than most children I see in urban settings. But nothing flagged. It was the 12th family that made me pause. A man came in alone with 2 children. He was tall, thin, somewhere around 50, with deep-set eyes and the wind-burned skin of someone who works outside. He gave his name as Dale Whitley. The children were a boy of about 7 and a girl of about 9. He introduced them as Cody and Emma. I started with Emma. Height, weight, vision, all normal. When I checked her teeth, I noticed something odd. Her front teeth, the upper central incisors, were pristine. Not just healthy, perfect. Unnaturally even and white, with a translucence at the edges that didn't look like the teeth of a 9-year-old who lived in a town without a dentist. They looked like they belonged in a dental textbook. I made a note and moved on. Cody was the same, healthy across every measure, but when I did the vision screening, he tracked the occluder with a patience that struck me as unusual for a 7-year-old boy. He didn't fidget. He didn't look away. He followed my instructions with a precision that felt almost rehearsed, not in the way of a child who had been coached, but in the way of someone who understood the procedure at a level beyond his years. Ideal if the children had been seen by a physician recently. They're healthy, he said, not defensive, not evasive, just certain in a way that closed the conversation. I finished the screenings, packed up my equipment and drove back to Omaha. I filed my reports. I noted the dental observation about Emma Whitley and the behavioral note about Cody Whitley. I flagged nothing because there was nothing to flag. Everything was within normal limits. Everything was fine. 3 months later, in June, I went back. This is where I need to slow down, because the thing that happened in June is the reason I'm here, and I have to get it right. I arrived on a Wednesday. Same routine, community center, folding table, sign-up sheet, fluorescent hum. The air was different this time, heavy and wet. The sky stacked with thunderheads that never quite broke. The kind of June day in western Nebraska where the atmosphere feels pressurized, like the whole landscape is holding its breath. 13 families came through, 26 children, most of the same ones from March. When I got to the Whitley family, Dale came in again, same as before, but this time he had 3 children. Cody, Emma, and a younger boy, maybe 5, whom Dale introduced as Braden. I checked my March records. Dale Whitley had brought 2 children. 2. I had recorded their names, their ages, their measurements. Cody and Emma. There was no Braden. I asked Dale, as casually as I could, whether Braden had been unable to attend the March visit. Dale looked at me with those deep-set eyes and said, "Braden's been here." I didn't push it. I screened the boy. He was healthy. Same uncanny dental perfection. Same unusual patience during the exam. I noted his information, and I noted that he had not been present in March, and I moved on. That night, in the motel in McCook where I always stayed, I pulled out Jim Oster's files. Jim had been visiting Harlow quarterly for 2 years before his medical leave. His records were meticulous. He'd been a good clinician, detail-oriented, the kind of person who noted everything. I went through his screening records for Harlow visit by visit. In his first visit, 18 months before mine, Jim had screened 19 children. In his second visit, 3 months later, he'd screened 22. In his third, 25. In his fourth, 28. In his fifth, 30. In his sixth, his last visit before going on leave, he'd screened 33. I sat with this for a long time. The math didn't work. Harlow had a population of 402. It was declining. There was no evidence of new families moving in. In fact, the opposite. I'd seen the vacancy rate on the drive through town. Empty houses, closed businesses. The school enrollment records I'd been given by the state-listed Harlow Elementary at 51 students for the current year, down from 58 the year before. But every quarter, there were more children in the screening. I went through Jim's individual records. He'd noted names. I compared them. The children from each prior visit were almost all present in the subsequent one, but each visit also included new names. Children who hadn't appeared before. Children who, based on their ages and the family names associated with them, should have been present at earlier screenings, but weren't. Children whose parents, when Jim had asked, gave answers very similar to what Dale Whitley had told me. "He's been here, she's always been here. I don't know what you mean." He was at the last one. Jim had started highlighting these entries in yellow. In his later files, the yellow highlighting was on nearly every page, and in the margin of his last Harlow report, in handwriting that was noticeably less steady than his earlier notes, he had written a single line: check the school, count the desks. I didn't sleep well that night. The motel was the Prairie Inn, a single-story L-shaped building with exterior corridors and doors that didn't quite seal against the frame. The thunderstorm finally broke around midnight, not the dramatic, cinematic kind, but the low, grinding kind, where the rain just comes and comes, and the thunder is more vibration than sound, something you feel in the mattress springs and the bones of the building. I lay there in the dark listening to the water on the metal awning outside my door, and I thought about Jim Oster, and I thought about those children, and I thought about the fact that I was thinking about it at all, which is not something I normally do. I do my job, I file my reports, I go home, but the numbers didn't make sense, and I am a person who needs numbers to make sense, because numbers are the only part of my job that I can actually control. In the morning, I drove back to Harlow. I hadn't planned to. My assignment was complete. But I told myself I was just going to verify something, just going to tie up a loose end, just going to take one more look so I could stop thinking about it. These are the things you tell yourself when you're already past the point of just anything. Harlow in the morning was quiet in a way that went beyond the normal quiet of a small town. It was a Thursday, just after 8. There should have been some movement. Trucks heading to fields, someone at the gas station, a dog in a yard. But Main Street was empty. The gas station was open. I could see the lights on inside, but no one was visible through the window. The only sound was the wind, which in western Nebraska is a constant, a kind of low, dry exhalation that moves through the grass and the power lines and the gaps in buildings, with a voice that isn't quite a voice but isn't quite not one either. I drove to the school. Harlow Elementary was a single-story brick building with a flat roof and a chain-link fence around a small playground, the kind of school that exists in hundreds of Nebraska towns, built in the 1960s with federal money, maintained with increasing difficulty ever since. The parking lot had 6 cars in it. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the hallway smelled like every school hallway in America. Disinfectant and paper, and the particular sweetness of children's bodies in enclosed space. The lights were on. I could hear a voice from one of the classrooms, the steady, modulated tone of a teacher addressing young children. I found the office. A woman was sitting behind the desk, mid-50s, grey hair, reading glasses on a chain. She looked up when I came in and smiled in a way that was polite and unsurprised. I introduced myself, showed my state ID, explained that I was following up on the wellness screenings and wanted to verify enrollment numbers for my report. "Of course," she said. Her name tag read MRS, Gunderson. "What do you need?" "Just current enrollment by grade," I said. "And if you have it, enrollment for the past 5 years. For the trend line." She pulled up the numbers on her computer without hesitation. 51 students currently enrolled, K through 6. She printed the breakdown for me. Then she pulled the historical numbers from a filing cabinet, printed spreadsheets going back a decade. Enrollment had been declining steadily. 68 5 years ago, 62 4 years ago, 58, 54, 51. I looked at the numbers. I looked at her, Mrs. Gunderson. I said, "I screened 26 children under 12 yesterday. Jim Oster screened 33 on his last visit. If your enrollment is 51 total, including all grades through 6th, those numbers track. But your enrollment 5 years ago was 68, and your population has only been declining. Where are the additional children coming from? She took off her glasses. She set them on the desk with a care that seemed deliberate. Some families homeschool, she said. Some children are in and out with custody arrangements. You know how it is. I did know how it was, and that answer would have been sufficient in any other town. But it wasn't sufficient here, because Jim's records showed the number of children increasing every quarter in a town where every other metric was going down, and because Mrs. Gunderson had delivered her answer with the same flattened certainty that Dale Whitley had used when he told me Braden had been here. I thanked her. I left the school. And then, because Jim's note was still in my head, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I walked back inside and asked if I could see the classrooms. Mrs. Gunderson hesitated. It was brief, less than a second. But I've spent 6 years reading the micro-expressions of people who are deciding how much to cooperate with the state. And I know what hesitation looks like when it's not about inconvenience, but about something else. The teachers are in session, she said. I won't interrupt. I just want to observe from the doorway. Standard practice for community health assessment. It isn't standard practice, but she didn't challenge it. She walked me down the hallway. There were 4 classrooms. She opened the door of the first one, the K1 room, and stood aside. I looked in. The room was small and bright, with construction paper artwork on the walls and a rug on the floor where children were, sitting in a semicircle facing a young woman who was reading from a picture book. I counted the children, 14. The enrollment sheet Mrs. Gunderson had given me listed 9 students in the combined K1 class. I looked at Mrs. Gunderson. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Not hostile, not anxious. Something closer to patient, like she was waiting for me to finish a process she'd watched other people go through before. I moved to the next classroom. 2nd and 3rd grade. The sheet said 12 enrolled. I counted 17. The 3rd classroom. 4th and 5th. The sheet said 15. I counted 21. The 4th classroom. 6th grade. The sheet said 15. I counted 19. 71 children in a school that officially enrolled 51 in a town of 402 people whose population was declining. I stood in the hallway and I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, which is something that happens to me when my body understands something before my mind does. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The smell of disinfectant was sweet and close. From behind the closed doors, I could hear the murmur of instruction, the small sounds of children shifting and breathing, and underneath it all, a quality of silence that I can only describe as density, like the building was holding more than it was built for, and the structure knew it. I turned to Mrs. Gunderson. The numbers don't match, I said. She put her glasses back on. She looked at me over the top of them. They never do, she said. But they're all ours. I left. I drove back to McCook. I sat in my motel room and I went through every piece of documentation I had, Jim's files, my own screening records, the enrollment sheets, the census data. I pulled up the county birth records through the state database. I searched for every child's name I'd recorded. 7 of the 26 children I'd screened the day before had no birth records in the state of Nebraska, no birth certificates, no hospital records, no immunization histories, no WIC enrollment, no Medicaid claims, nothing. They existed in Harlow's school enrollment and in my screening paperwork and nowhere else. One of them was Braden Whitley. I called Carolyn. I told her the numbers were inconsistent. and asked if she had any additional context from Jim's files. She was quiet for a moment, then said Jim had flagged some data discrepancies but hadn't filed a formal concern before his leave. I asked what kind of medical leave Jim was on. I can't share that, Dana. You know that. Is he okay? Another pause. He's receiving care. That's all I can say. I asked if anyone else from the department had visited Harlow before Jim. I'd have to check. It's been in the rotation for as long as I've had the district. Probably 15 years at least. Can you pull the historical screening data? All of it. That's a records request. It'll take a couple weeks. I'll wait. I drove home. I filed my reports. I included the enrollment discrepancy and the missing birth records as a data note, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of raising your hand very quietly in a very large room. Nobody responded. 3 weeks later, the historical records arrived. They came as scanned PDFs, hundreds of pages of screening forms going back 12 years, covering 4 different health liaisons who had serviced the Harlow route before Jim. I spread them across my kitchen table, and I started counting. The pattern was unmistakable. 12 years ago, the first liaison, a woman named Sandra Pulley, had screened 11 children in Harlow. The town's population was 523. The school enrollment was 72. 11 children at a screening was low but not unusual. Participation in these events is voluntary, and in small towns turnout varies. But each subsequent visit, Sandra screened more children. 13, 16, 18, 20. By her last year on the route, she was seeing 24 children per visit. Then she transferred to a different district. The next liaison picked up at roughly the same number and continued the trend. 26, 29, 31. Then he retired. The next one, same thing. 33, 35. Then Jim, starting at 30, ending at 33. And now me, at 22 and 26 on my 2 visits. The number of children being screened in Harlow had nearly tripled in 12 years, during a period when the town's population had dropped by over 20%. I went through every name. I cross-referenced with state birth records, school enrollment, Medicaid databases, immunization registries. The picture that emerged was this. At any given time, roughly 60% of the children being screened in Harlow had normal, verifiable histories. They had been born in Nebraska hospitals. They had birth certificates and social security numbers and vaccination records. They were real children belonging to real families in a real town. The other 40% had nothing. They appeared in Harlow's records, school enrollment, screening forms, church directories when I managed to find one. And nowhere else. They had names. They had families who claimed them. They lived in houses. They attended school. But according to every state and federal database I could access, they did not exist. And the proportion was shifting. 12 years ago, it was maybe 10% now. It was 40. Every year, more of the children in Harlow were children who had come from nowhere. I need to stop here and tell you something about how I felt, because I think it matters. I was not afraid. Not yet. What I felt was something more like professional irritation. The specific frustration of a bureaucrat who has found a discrepancy that no one else seems interested in resolving. Missing records happen. Data gaps happen. Rural families are mobile and sometimes fall through administrative cracks. There were rational explanations for every individual case. It was only the aggregate that was wrong. It was only the trend. But I am a person who has spent 6 years watching trends, and I know what it looks like when a number moves in a direction it shouldn't move. And the thing about Harlow was that every number was moving in a direction it shouldn't move, except one. The town was losing people. The town was losing businesses. The town was losing tax revenue and postal volume and registered vehicles. By every measure, Harlow was disappearing, except for its children. Its children were multiplying. My third visit was in September. I want to describe the drive, because the drive is part of it. 5 hours across the middle of Nebraska in early fall. The corn was tall and just starting to turn. The soybeans were yellowing. The sky was that particular September blue that looks like it goes on forever, and probably does. I had the window cracked, and the air smelled like dust and chlorophyll, and the faint, sweet rot of organic matter doing what organic matter does at the end of a growing season. It's a smell I've always loved. It smells like the state I've lived in my whole life. I passed through North Platte and turned south. The road narrowed. The towns shrank. I passed a grain elevator with Pioneer painted on the side in letters 3 stories tall. I passed a church with a sign that read, "God counts every hair on your head." And I thought about counting. And I thought about Harlow. And I thought about the 40%. I arrived just before 10. The community center was open. The fluorescent lights were on, buzzing their thin, insistent song. The banner still said Harlow Harvest Festival 2019. I set up my table. 15 families came. 34 children. 8 more than June. I screened every one of them. I was meticulous. I took detailed notes. I recorded not just the standard metrics, but observations, behavioral, patterns, dental condition, fine motor skills, eye contact, response time. I was looking for something. I didn't know what. What I found was this: the children who had verifiable records, the ones I'd started thinking of as the original children, though I hated the term, were normal, healthy, mostly with the usual range of minor issues. Cavities, mild asthma, a boy with eczema on his wrists, a girl who needed glasses. They fidgeted, they cried, they asked to go to the bathroom. They were children. The others were also children, but they were children in a way that felt like a very careful drawing of children. Their teeth were perfect. Their skin was clear. They sat still during examinations with a patience that bordered on the uncanny. When I spoke to them, they responded appropriately, but with a slight delay. Not a processing delay, not the hesitation of a shy child, but something more like the pause of someone selecting from a range of possible responses. Their eyes tracked my movements with an evenness that made me think of the word calibration, which is not a word anyone should think of while looking at a 7-year-old. And there was one more thing. I didn't notice it until I was reviewing my notes that night. The original children, the ones with records, had the normal variation you'd expect. Different heights, different weights, different builds. Some were skinny, some were heavy, some were tall for their age, some were short, the usual human scatter. The other children were all within 2 standard deviations of the mean for their age and sex, every single one. Height, weight, BMI, head circumference. They were not identical. They looked different from each other, had different hair, different features, different skin tones, roughly matching the families they belonged to. But metrically, statistically, they were centered. Perfectly, impossibly centered. I sat in the Prairie Inn that night with my laptop and my files and a can of Diet Coke that went warm and flat while I ran the numbers 3 times. The probability of 13 children falling within that range of statistical normality across every metric by chance was so low that I couldn't calculate it with the tools I had. It wasn't just unlikely. It was the kind of unlikely that points towards something other than chance. The rain started around 11, the same grinding, persistent rain from June. I listened to it on the metal awning, and I thought about Mrs. Gunderson saying, "They're all ours," with that patient, waiting expression. And I thought about Dale Whitley saying, "Braden's been here." And I thought about Jim Oster writing, "Check the school, count the desks in the margin of his last report." And I thought about the fact that Jim Oster was now receiving care for something Carolyn wouldn't name. And I thought about the fact that I was going to go back tomorrow, even though my assignment was done, because there was one thing I hadn't checked. The thing that had been sitting in the back of my mind since June, the question I hadn't asked, because I was afraid of what the answer would do to the tidy professional framework I'd been using to contain all of this, the missing children. I'd been so focused on the children who were appearing that I hadn't looked at the ones who weren't. The enrollment had been declining for a decade. The population, families were leaving. Children were, presumably, leaving with them. But were they? I opened the historical enrollment records. I started with the oldest year I had, and I began tracking individual names forward, time, following each child from their first appearance in the enrollment to their last, and then checking whether they appeared anywhere else afterward, a new school district, a forwarding address, any sign that they'd gone somewhere rather than simply stopped being counted. It took me 3 hours. The Diet Coke grew a film on its surface. The rain intensified and then softened and then intensified again. My back ached from hunching over the laptop, and when I finished, I had a list of 31 children who had appeared in Harlow's enrollment records at some point over the past 12 years and then disappeared from every database I could access. No transfer records, no new enrollment anywhere in Nebraska or any bordering state, no Medicaid activity, no nothing. Children had left the count, and roughly the same number of new, unverifiable children had entered it. I want to be very precise about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I am not saying that the children I screened were the same children who disappeared. I am not saying anything about what happened to the children who left. I am saying that the numbers were balanced, that for every child who vanished from the record, a new child appeared who had no record to begin with, and that this exchange had been happening steadily, incrementally, for over a decade. I closed my laptop. I turned off the light. I lay in the dark listening to the rain, and I realized that I was afraid, finally, not of something specific, but of the shape of the thing I was looking at, which was too large and too regular to be an accident, and too quiet to be a crime in any sense that I knew how to report. In the morning, I drove back to Harlow for the 3rd time that week. This time, the town was not empty. People were out. A man was mowing a lawn on Elm Street. 2 women were talking outside the post office. A pickup truck rolled past me on Main Street, and the driver raised 2 fingers off the wheel in that universal rural greeting. It looked like any small town on a September morning, and for a moment I felt the full weight of my own absurdity. A tired state employee with a spreadsheet and a theory, imposing patterns on a place that was just a place. But I drove the school anyway. I parked in the lot and sat in my car for a few minutes, watching. It was mid-morning during class time. The playground was empty. The building hummed with the low electrical frequency of institutional life, HVAC, lights, the dozens of small machines that keep a building functional. Through the windows, I could see the shapes of children at desks, the movement of a teacher's arm. I went inside. Mrs. Gunderson was at her desk. "Back again," she said. "Not a question." "I have a few follow-up items," I said. Enrollment reconciliation for the quarterly report. She nodded. She didn't ask what items. She didn't ask to see authorization. She just sat there, behind her desk, with her glasses on their chain and her hands folded, and waited for me to ask whatever I was going to ask. I've been reviewing historical enrollment, I said. I'm seeing a number of students who appear in your records for several years and then drop out with no transfer documentation, no forwarding school, no records requests from another district. They just stop appearing. Families move, Mrs. Gunderson said. 31 families in 12 years? In a town this size? People leave. You've seen the population numbers. It's not unique to Harlow. But when families move, there's usually a trail. Transfer records. New enrollment somewhere. These children just stop existing in any system. Mrs. Gunderson looked at me. The patience was there again, that quality of waiting, of watching someone work through something she'd already resolved for herself long ago. Miss McGuire, she said, what are you actually asking me? And I didn't know. That was the terrible thing. I had numbers and patterns and a feeling in my chest, like a fist closing slowly, and I had no question that would produce an answer I could put in a report. What are you doing with the children? Was not a question a health liaison asks a school secretary. It was a question that belonged to a different kind of investigation entirely. And I was not that kind of investigator, and this was not that kind of visit. And the fluorescent lights were buzzing, and Mrs. Gunderson was waiting, and I was standing in a school hallway in a town of 400 people in southwestern Nebraska, and I had no authority and no language and no way to say what I was actually thinking, which was that the children of Harlow were being replaced, and no one would tell me why. I'm just reconciling the data, I said. The data's all there, she said. You're welcome to anything we have. I thanked her. I left. I sat in my car in the parking lot and I watched the school, and I tried to think clearly, and I couldn't not think clearly because the thing I was looking at did not have a clear shape. It had a statistical shape. It had an arithmetic reality, but it did not have a human explanation that I could find. And the people who lived inside it did not seem distressed or coerced or confused. They seemed settled. They seemed like people who had made a peace with something that I had not been offered the opportunity to make peace with. I was about to start the car when I saw a woman walking across the parking lot toward the school's side entrance. She was carrying a casserole dish. She was in her 60s, thin, wearing a cardigan despite the warm morning. She glanced at my state vehicle and changed direction, walking toward me instead. I rolled down my window. You're the health lady, she said. Dana McGuire. Tss, I know who you are. She shifted the casserole dish to one hip. You've been here 3 days running, just finishing up my quarterly. I know what you're doing. She said it without hostility, almost with sympathy. Jim did the same thing. The one before him did the same thing. You find the numbers. You come back. You start asking questions that nobody can answer because the answers aren't the kind you can write down. I turned off the engine. My name is Vera Koss, she said. I've lived here 53 years. I taught 4th grade in that building for 28 of them. I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to go inside and deliver this hot dish, and you're going to drive back to Omaha, and you're going to decide what to do with it. That's the arrangement. What arrangement? The one where someone tells you, and then you have to carry it. She set the casserole dish on the hood of my car. The metal was warm from the sun, and I could smell something savory through the foil. Ground beef, onions, the starchy comfort of noodles. The first one came back in 2011, Vera said. Molly Akers. She was 8 years old and she'd been gone for 7 months. Her parents had reported her missing in March. Search went on for weeks. Dogs, volunteers, the whole county sheriff's department never found her. The family was destroyed. Her mother stopped going to church. Her father started drinking in the morning. And then in October, Molly was at school, sitting at her desk, 3rd row, 2nd seat. Mrs. Palmer was teaching that year. She looked up from her lesson plan, and Molly Akers was sitting there with her hands folded and her hair brushed and her shoes clean, and Mrs. Palmer screamed. She screamed so loud they heard it in the office. But Molly just sat there, hands folded, looking at Mrs. Palmer like she was waiting for the lesson to continue. The parents came, the sheriff came, everyone came, and Molly was Molly. She knew her parents. She knew her house. She knew her dog's name. She answered every question anyone asked her. She was calm and clean and healthy, and she would not say where she had been. Not wouldn't as in refused. Wouldn't as in the question didn't seem to connect to anything inside her, like asking a fish about the water. Vera paused. She looked at the school building with an expression that I recognized from my own mirror. The face of someone who is very tired of knowing something. Her parents took her home, Vera continued. What else were they going to do? She was their daughter. She was back. The sheriff investigated, found nothing. No evidence of abduction. No evidence of abuse. No evidence of anything. Molly was healthy. Molly was home. Case closed. But she wasn't the same, not wrong, not damaged, just precise. Like someone had taken her apart and put her back together with better instructions. Her teeth were perfect. She'd had cavities before she went missing, 2 of them, and now her teeth looked like they'd never seen sugar. She didn't fidget anymore. She sat still in a way that children don't sit still. Her grades went from average to flawless, and 6 months after Molly came back, Tyler Brandt went missing. I could feel the sun on my arm through the open window. I could hear the wind in the grass beyond the parking lot. I could hear, very faintly, the sound of children's voices from inside the school, and the sound was like any school sound anywhere, bright and formless. The collective noise of young human beings existing together in a room. Tyler came back 4 months later, Vera said. Same as Molly. Clean, healthy, perfect. And 2 months after Tyler, the Jessup girl disappeared. It's been going on for 14 years. One goes, one comes back. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes there's a gap, but the rhythm holds. The town learned not to panic when a child went missing, because the child always came back, always, and they come back better, healthier, calmer, more capable. Whatever happens to them out there, wherever they go, it improves them by every measure anyone can see. But they're not the same children. Vera said this flatly, without drama. The way you say something you've said to yourself so many times that it's lost its ability to shock you. I taught Molly Akers before she went missing, and I watched her in the hallway after she came back, and she was not the same child, not a different person pretending to be Molly, not a stranger in Molly's body. Something worse than either of those. She was Molly with something essential removed and something else in its place. Something that fit perfectly. Something that knew all the words and all the names and all the songs, but didn't know them the way a child knows things, knew them the way She stopped. She picked up the casserole dish. I don't have a word for it, she said. I've had 14 years, and I don't have a word for it. Jim Oster didn't have a word for it either. He looked for one until he couldn't look anymore. What happened to Jim? I asked. Vera studied me. The sympathy in her expression deepened into something heavier. He went down to the creek, she said. He thought that's where they went, where they were taken. He set up cameras. He went at night. He went alone 3 times. The 4th time he called his supervisor from a number that wasn't his phone and said he needed help. And when they found him, he was sitting in 2 inches of water in the Frenchman Creek drainage, repeating a phrase that the paramedics couldn't transcribe because it wasn't in any language they recognized. And he's been in a residential facility in Lincoln ever since. She said this as if she were describing a traffic pattern or a weather event. Something regrettable but known. He went looking for the mechanism, she said. The how and the where and the what. And the mechanism doesn't want to be found. It wants to be used. The children go, and the children come back, and the town accepts it because the alternative is to not accept it, and nobody here has the resources for that. We're 400 people in the middle of nothing. What are we supposed to do? Call the FBI and say our children keep disappearing and coming back healthier? Who would believe us? Who would even come? She turned toward the school. You can report what you found, she said. The data discrepancies, the missing records. You can file it and flag it and escalate it. And someone will come and look at a town full of healthy children and functional families and a school that clean and warm and staffed, and they will find nothing wrong because nothing is wrong in any way that a report can capture, and then they'll leave. And the rhythm will continue, and you'll know what you know, and you won't be able to do anything with it. She walked 3 steps and stopped without turning around. Or you can stop counting, she said. That's what most of us did. We stopped counting and we started just living with it. And the living is fine, Dana. The living is honestly fine. The children are loved. The town is intact. The only thing you have to give up is the idea that the love and the intactness are entirely yours. She went inside. The door closed behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. I sat in the parking lot for 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I watched the school, and I watched the clock, and I listened to the wind, and I thought about Vera Koss and Jim, Oster and Molly Akers, and Braden Whitley, and the 40%, and the trend line, and the 31 children who had gone missing over 12 years, and the roughly 31 children who had come back to take their place in a system that was functioning, by every visible measure, better than most of the towns I visited. Then I started the car, and I drove to Omaha, and I didn't stop once in 5 hours. I filed my report. I included the enrollment discrepancies. I included the missing birth records. I did not include Vera Koss's account because it was unverifiable testimony, and I am a bureaucrat and bureaucrats do not file unverifiable testimony. I flagged the data for review and I submitted it through the standard channel, and I waited. 2 weeks later, Carolyn called me. I got your Harlow flag, she said. I've passed it to compliance. They'll probably send someone from the data integrity team to reconcile the enrollment numbers with the school district. And the missing birth records? They'll look at it. Could be a database issue. Could be families who crossed state lines. You know how it is with border counties. Harlow isn't a border county. Dana, Carolyn's voice, had the particular gentleness that supervisors use when they're about to say something they'd rather not. Jim flagged similar concerns. The review was inconclusive. The school is accredited. The children are enrolled. The families are cooperative. There's no evidence of abuse or neglect or trafficking. There's a data discrepancy that could have 6 administrative explanations. I'm not saying you're wrong to flag it. I'm saying that the system we work in responds to certain kinds of problems, and this isn't one of them. What kind of problem is it? Silence then. I don't know, and neither did Jim. And I need you to hear me when I say that Jim is not okay, Dana. He's not okay, and he wasn't not okay before Harlow. He became not okay because of Harlow, because he couldn't stop looking at something that doesn't have a bottom. I heard what she was saying. I heard the warning inside the concern and the concern inside the warning, and I appreciated both because Carolyn is a decent person who was trying to protect me from the thing that had swallowed Jim Oster, and she was right to try. I told her I understood. I told her I'd let compliance handle it. I told her I'd complete my remaining quarterly visits and move on. I lied. In December, I went back to Harlow for my 4th visit. The screening was scheduled and legitimate. 20 families came, 39 children, 5 more than September. The trend line continued its impossible upward march. I screened them all. I was professional and thorough. And I smiled at the parents, and I measured the children, and I noted their perfect teeth, and their centered metrics, and their uncanny stillness, and I said nothing about any of it. But I also did something I had never done before in my career. I deviated from protocol. During the screenings, while I had each child in front of me, I asked them a question that was not on any form. I asked it casually, slipped in between the vision test and the dental check, delivered in the same friendly tone I used for everything else. What's your favorite thing to do after school? The original children, the ones with records, answered the way children answer. Confusingly, enthusiastically, sometimes nonsensically. I play Minecraft. I ride my bike. Me and Tyler dig holes. My mom lets me watch YouTube, but only for 30 minutes, which is not enough. They were specific and messy and alive. The other children, the 40%, answered differently. Not wrong, not robotic, not in unison, but with a quality that I can only describe as compositional. Like each answer had been assembled from the correct components of a child's answer, without the underlying experience that generates the answer organically. I like to play, one said. I enjoy being outside, said another. I read books and spend time with my family, said a third. These are things children say, but they are not things children say like that, with that cadence, that completeness, that grammatical tidiness. Children's answers are fragments. They're half-finished thoughts, derailed by sudden memories of something more interesting. The answers I got from the 40% were like resume lines for childhood. Accurate, appropriate, composed. I noted every response. I drove to McCook. I sat in the Prairie Inn. And then I did the thing that I have been trying to explain to you for the last 11 months. The thing that I am telling you about at 4 in the morning, because I cannot tell anyone else, because there is no one else to tell, and because the thing I did was very small and very quiet, and it changed everything. I drove back to Harlow after dark. It was December in western Nebraska, and the sun set at 5:15, and by 6 the world was black in a way that people who live in cities do not understand. There is no ambient light. There are no neighboring towns close enough to paint the horizon. There is only the road in your headlights and the stars above, and the absolute darkness on every side. And if you turn your headlights off, there is nothing except the stars and the sense of a landscape too large to comprehend, holding you in its open palm. I pulled into Harlow from the south. I didn't take Main Street. I took a side road that ran along the eastern edge of town, past the water tower, past a row of houses with lit windows and blue television glow, and I parked on a dirt track between 2 fields, about a quarter mile from the school. I turned off the engine. I turned off the lights. I sat. I didn't know what I was waiting for. I didn't have a plan. I had a flashlight and a granola bar and a thermos of coffee. and the particular stubbornness of a woman who has spent her adult life inside systems that function by not looking, and who has decided, for reasons she cannot fully articulate, to look. The temperature dropped. My breath fogged inside the car. The stars were very bright. Mid-December in rural Nebraska, no moon, the Milky Way like a stain across the sky. I could see the school's outline against the stars, a low dark shape. Beyond it, the town. Beyond the town, the fields. Beyond the fields, the creek drainage, a depression in the landscape marked by the slightly darker line of dormant trees. At 9:17, the lights in the houses began going out. Not all at once. Gradually, over the course of about 20 minutes, window by window, the town went dark. This is normal. Small towns go to bed early. Farmers rise before dawn. There was nothing strange about it. At 10:04, I saw movement near the school. It was small, at the edge of perception, a shape detaching from the building's shadow and moving east across the open ground between the school and the nearest field. Then another shape, then 3 more. Children. I could see them in the starlight barely, as silhouettes, small, moving with a purpose and coordination that was completely silent. No voices, no flashlight beams, no stumbling. They moved across the field, in a loose group, heading east toward the creek drainage, and they moved with the same uncanny precision that I had observed in the screening room. That centered, calibrated quality that didn't belong to childhood. Counted 9 of them before they passed beyond what I could see. I should have stayed in the car. I should have started the engine and driven to McCook and called Carolyn in the morning and told her that children were leaving the school building at night and walking into the fields unsupervised, and that whatever the compliance team thought about data, discrepancies, this was a child safety issue that demanded immediate response. But I didn't do that. I got out of the car and I followed them. The air was bitter. My shoes crunched on the frozen stubble of the harvested field. I kept my distance, 100 yards at least, and I didn't use my flashlight. The children were ahead of me, still moving east, still silent, their shapes intermittently visible against the slightly lighter horizon. The field ended at a fence line, beyond which the ground sloped down toward the creek. I could see the tree line, bare cottonwoods and willows, their branches like cracks in the sky. The children passed through a gap in the fence and descended the slope without breaking stride. I reached the fence. I stopped. Below me, in the drainage, I could see them. 9 small shapes gathered at the edge of the creek bed, which was dry or nearly dry in December, just a thread of dark water in a wide channel of frozen mud and dead grass. They stood in a line facing the creek. They were perfectly still, and then, from the creek bed, something answered. I don't mean a sound. I don't mean a voice. I mean that the air in the drainage changed. The quality of the darkness changed. The temperature, already cold, dropped in a way that I felt not on my skin but in my chest, behind my sternum, in the place where I imagine my heart's electrical system originates. It was not a sensation of cold. It was a sensation of attention. Something in the creek drainage became aware of the children standing at its edge, and that awareness had a weight, a presence, a directional quality, like a beam of light that you can feel but not see. The children stood in their line, and they did not move, and the presence in the drainage regarded them, and I stood at the fence with my hands gripping the top wire, and I understood, in a way that was not rational but was absolutely certain, that I was watching a transaction. Something was being given. Something was being received. The children were the medium of exchange. One of the shapes at the end of the line, the smallest, A child who could not have been more than 5 stepped forward and walked into the creek bed. The darkness took the shape of the child, the way water takes the shape of a stone that sinks into it, by closing over, by continuing, by offering no evidence that anything was ever there. The child was gone. The remaining 8 stood for another minute. Then they turned, together, and began walking back toward the town. Their movement was the same as before, silent, purposeful, coordinated, but there were 8 now instead of 9. And the space where the 9th had been was not a gap but a completeness, as if the line had always been 8, as if the 9th had never existed. I stayed at the fence. I stayed there long after they were gone. The drainage was dark and silent, and the thin thread of water caught starlight in a way that made it look like a wire laid across the ground. The air returned to its normal cold. The presence was gone. I walked back to my car. I drove to McCook. I sat in the motel room with every light on, and I did not sleep. In the morning, I drove back to Harlow, and I went to the school, and I asked Mrs. Gunderson to print the current enrollment. She did. 52 students. I had screened 39 children 2 days ago. 9 had walked to the creek. 1 had gone in. 8 had come back. If 1 child was gone, the enrollment should have reflected a loss. Instead, it had gone up by 1. I looked at the list. There was a new name, a kindergartner, Lily Brandt. I looked at Mrs. Gunderson. Lily's new, I said. Lily's been here, Mrs. Gunderson said. I walked down the hallway to the K1 classroom. I looked through the window in the door. 14 children, the same count as in June. But in the back row, there was a small girl I had never seen before. She was sitting with her hands folded on her desk. Her posture was perfect. Her hair was brushed. She was looking directly at the door, directly at me, with eyes that were brown and clear and patient and absolutely, terribly still. I drove back to Omaha. I filed no report. There was nothing to report. A child had walked into a dry creek bed in the dark, and the dark had taken her. And in the morning, there was a new child in the kindergarten class, and the enrollment was up by 1, and the town was fine, and the school was warm, and the children were healthy, and the system was functioning exactly as it had been functioning for 14 years. I sat with it for a week. I didn't eat well. I didn't sleep well. Biscuit needed his insulin twice a day, and I administered it with hands that were not quite steady, and I looked into his old, cloudy eyes, and I thought not about Vera Koss saying, "The living is honestly fine," and I thought about what that word means, fine, and how it can contain so much acceptance and so much surrender, and still technically be accurate. On the 7th day, I called the Harlan County Sheriff's Department. I asked to speak with someone about missing children cases in the Harlow area. The dispatcher transferred me to a deputy named Wes Gallagher. I identified myself. I told him I was a state health worker following up on enrollment discrepancies. I asked whether there had been any missing children reports from Harlow in the past decade. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They come back." "I'm sorry?" "The missing kids, they always come back. We've had," I heard papers shuffling, 17 reports over the past 12 years, every single one resolved. Child returned home safely. No evidence of foul play. No evidence of abduction. No evidence of anything, frankly. Kid goes missing. Family files a report. We search. We don't find anything. And then a few months later, the kid's back, healthy, unharmed, won't say where they were. Case closed. And that doesn't concern you. Ma'am, I have a county of 4,000 people, 3 deputies including myself, and a budget that wouldn't cover a single forensic interview. I have meth labs in basements and domestic calls every weekend. and cattle theft and grain fraud, and kids going missing and coming back safe, and healthy is the best problem I've got. You want me to investigate families for having their children returned to them? He wasn't being dismissive. He was being honest. He was a man in a system that, like mine, was designed to process certain kinds of problems and was structurally incapable of seeing others. The children came back. The metrics were good. The reports closed. The system worked. I thanked him. I hung up. And I understood, finally, what Viracos had meant about stopping counting. It wasn't that the people of Harlow were complicit. It wasn't that Deputy Gallagher was negligent. It wasn't that Carolyn was indifferent. It was that the thing happening in Harlow operated precisely within the tolerances of every system designed to detect harm. Children were healthy. Families were intact. Schools were functional. Every indicator was green. The only evidence that something was wrong was a statistical trend that required years of data to see and a willingness to believe that healthy, loved, well-fed children sitting in clean classrooms could be the symptom of something monstrous. I didn't go back to Harlow for my March visit. I asked Carolyn to reassign it. I told her the drive was too long for my current caseload, which was true enough. She gave Harlow to a new liaison named Keith, a young guy fresh out of his MPH program, earnest and thorough and completely unprepared for what the numbers would eventually show him. I thought about warning him. I thought about pulling him aside and saying, Keith, when you go to Harlow, count the children, and then count them again, and when the numbers don't match, drive away and don't go back. But I didn't, because what would I be protecting him from? Data? A town full of healthy kids? A creek bed that I stood beside in the dark and saw something I can't prove and can barely describe? I let him go. I let the system process him the way it processed me. And Jim and whoever came before Jim. I let the rhythm continue because I couldn't stop it. And because trying to stop it had cost Jim Oster his mind and would cost me mine if I let it. But I didn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't. And in April, sitting at my kitchen table at 3 a.m, in the same chair I'm sitting in now, I did one more search, the last one, the one I wish I hadn't done. I pulled up census data for every town within 50 miles of Harlow. I pulled up school enrollment data. I pulled up birth records and population trends and every metric I could find. And I ran the same analysis I'd run for Harlow, population trend versus child population trend for every community in the region. Harlow was not the only one. Arapahoe, population declining. Child enrollment increasing. Indianola, population declining. Child enrollment increasing. Cambridge, same. Bartley, same. Every small town within a 30-mile radius of the Frenchman Creek drainage showed the same pattern. The adults were leaving. The children were multiplying. The schools were full. The metrics were perfect. The system was green across the board. I closed my laptop. I didn't open it again for 3 days. It's June now, 11 months since my last visit to Harlow. Keith has been twice. I haven't asked him about it. I don't need to. I can see it starting in him. The same distraction, the same late-night look, the same quality of someone who has found a number that doesn't add up and can't stop recalculating. He'll find the pattern. He'll go back. He'll stand at a fence line somewhere in the dark, and he'll see what I saw, or something like it, and he'll have to decide what to do with it. I can't help him. I couldn't help Jim. I can't help the 31 children who walked into the creek bed or the 31 children who walked out of it wearing different names and perfect teeth and that terrible, patient stillness. I can't help the families who love them because the families do love them. That's the thing. The families love these children completely. and the children accept that love and the love is real, even if the children are not or are not entirely, or are not in the way that the word children has ever meant before. Vera Koss was right. The living is fine. That's not a lie. The living in Harlow is honestly, measurably, documentably fine. The children are fed and sheltered and educated and cared for. The town functions. The system works. The creek gives back what it takes, improved and optimized, and the only price is the original, the actual child who walked into the drainage and was swallowed by something that has no name and no shape and no interest in being understood. I think about Molly Akers, the first one, 8 years old when she disappeared, 8 years old when she came back. She'd be 22 now. I looked her up. She's at the University of Nebraska, Dean's List, pre-med, perfect GPA. Of course, I think about Braden Whitley, who never existed in any database until he appeared at a folding table in the Harlow Community Center and let me check his perfect teeth with a patience that no 5-year-old possesses. I think about the child I saw walk into the creek bed, the smallest one, 5 years old, maybe, gone into the dark like a stone into water, and the water didn't even ripple. I think about the fact that I followed 9 children across a frozen field and stood at a fence and watched and did nothing. I think about the fact that I then drove home and filed no report. I think about the fact that I am telling you this now, 11 months later, in a medium that will reach no one with the authority to act, and that, even if it did, the acting would find nothing, because the system is designed to see health and function and safety, and it sees all of those things in Harlow and in Arapahoe and in Indianola and in Cambridge and in Bartley and in however many other towns, along however many other creek drainages, in however many other states, where the numbers don't add up, but the children are fine. The children are always fine. That's how you know something is wrong. Last week I was doing a screening in Gothenburg, which is a town of about 30,500 on I-80, a real town. A town with a grocery store and a movie theater and a medical clinic. Normal town, normal screening, normal kids. But one of them, a boy, 7 years old, name of Marcus Reed, sat perfectly still while I checked his vision. He didn't fidget. He didn't look away. He tracked the occluder with an evenness that made my hands go cold. His teeth were perfect. I checked his records. Born at Good Samaritan Hospital in Kearney. Full immunization history. Medicaid enrolled since birth. He was real. He was verified. He was a normal child in a normal town 70 miles from Harlow. But when I asked him what his favorite thing to do after school was, he looked at me with those brown, clear, patient eyes, and he said, "I enjoy being outside." And I felt it again. That sensation from the creek bed, not cold, not sound, attention, something vast and distributed and patient beyond any human frame of patience, looking at me through the eyes of a 7-year-old boy in Gothenburg, Nebraska, and recognizing me, not as a threat, not as an obstacle, as someone it had already shown itself to and who had done nothing, as someone who was, by her inaction, part of the system that let it work. I finished the screening. I smiled at his mother. I filed the paperwork. I went home, and I gave Biscuit his insulin, and I sat at this table and I started writing. The children of Harlow keep coming back. That's what I can tell you. They keep coming back, and they're better than they were. And the town is fine, and the system is green, and the creek runs through 6 counties and empties into a river that feeds a river, that feeds a river, that goes all the way to the Missouri, and from there to the Mississippi, and from there to the Gulf. And I don't know what that means, except that water connects everything to everything, and the children keep coming back, and they're spreading outward now, not just in Harlow, not just along the Frenchman, but outward into normal towns, into verified lives, into systems that will never flag them because they are by every measure perfect. I am not going to stop them. I want you to understand that. I am not going to stop them because I can't. And because I don't know if stopping them would be right. And because the ones who came back are loved, and they accept that love, and they live in it, and maybe that's enough. Maybe love is enough, even when the thing being loved is not what you think it is. Maybe the creek gives back something better than what it takes, and the price is one we should be willing to pay. I don't believe that, but I can't prove it's wrong. And next quarter, Keith will go to Harlow, and he'll count the children, and there will be more.